Just joining us, let's get into the Editor's Choice now, where we discuss stories that are making headlines in your favorite reads this weekend. And to help us do that is Sowetan editor Nwabisa Makunga and the Sunday Times senior investigative journalist Thanduxolo Jika, and they join me via the virtual platform. A very good afternoon to both of you. Can I start with the story that is making the front page of the Sunday Times, Thanduxolo, saying that you come from that publication, and the headline goes, Pali's 1 million rand a day fire escape. It appears that 1 million rand a day is the amount that the National Assembly will possibly be paying to conduct its daily business. Talk us through exactly what is happening there, because the understanding is that there's also the Cape Town International Convention Center, which is possibly being explored as a possible venue. What's going on here?
Evening, Collie. So essentially, at this point in time, because Parliament burned down, as we all know, now Parliament has to start with its business, and they need to be accommodated somewhere. They are looking at various options available to them. There's also pressure, from the opposition that they need to do their oversight properly, and they are unable to do so virtually. So there's a need to meet physically. So there's a need for Parliament to actually continue with its business. But now it boils down to rands and cents. And that is where the issue is. That amount is quite hefty. But you would remember, there's support staff, there's MPs, it's a lot of people that need to be accommodated.
Yeah.
So the question is around the fact that, is that too much to pay? But at the same time, there's an important issue of Parliament doing its business and protecting the interests of South Africans. So that's essentially, what is at the core of the story.
Yeah. Nwabisa, let's look at what's making the front page of the City Press newspaper. And the headline goes, Zuma man's fake degree. This is a story about the former spy chief, Arthur Fraser, who does not hold a university degree, which is a claim he has put forward throughout his career. This is a story written by Jacques Poe.
Absolutely. Isn't it funny, Collie? He gets caught out in this lie by Jacques Poe, and what we are made to understand, at least from reading the story, is that, first thing that he does when he gets sent questions is to alter, or at least his profile on the website at the time gets altered almost immediately to kind of say, well, it's not really, from the University of London, as he had initially suggested, but it's actually from the London Institute. But, Jacques Paul goes on to say, basically having done all his fact-checking, there actually is no such thing. There is no degree that he's received from a university or a London Institute.
Yeah.
Were we surprised, though? I think is the question. I think many people would probably not. Absolutely not. I don't think so. I think it does, though, again, highlights. If you think about it, a person who headed up the SSA, claiming to have a degree that he does not have, it really does highlight essentially what that agency was and became, under him. Because how is it not verified?
But hang on one second, Nwabisa. Someone listening to both of us are going to, they will probably agree and say the previous administration, under whose watch Arthur Fraser would have allegedly done all the things that he did at the agency. Having looked at all of that, perhaps some people will say it wouldn't be a surprise that the issue of his qualifications would not have been followed up, or perhaps one would not have had appetite to begin with to do that, given the kind of role that he had under former President Jacob Zuma. But this is a new administration, Nwabisa, and if you read that article, it talks about how particularly senior civil servants, they go through a vetting process where there are issues of security clearance that ought to be done. And surely something like this is surely criminal.
It absolutely is. But Toli, I think let's not fall into the trap of an old and a new administration.
Okay.
I think we understand fully, what has happened in that agency, but also in many other parts of government. So the idea that it was, one sort of one ANC regime and then another one is not entirely a true reflection of what is happening in many parts of government. So for me, the fact that it would have been a new administration does not necessarily mean that the things that would have happened at the time, such as this, would not have happened, at this time. So it's just one of those things that, there's a criminal, I think there is a criminal investigation now, or investigation of some sort.
Yes.
Whether that will actually yield to any results is obviously quite questionable.
Sure. Thanduxolo Jika, if I were to ask you for stories that piqued your interest, I think it's quite obvious. In the Sunday Times, the story that carries your name there with the headline, Mbalula, quote-unquote, new PRASA board was out to get me. These are the words of the now ousted CEO, Mr. Zolani Matthews. Tell us more.
Well, it's quite a worrying story, in fact, coming to think about it. So Zolani Matthews submitted an affidavit for his arbitration, and he, in that affidavit, he attaches a text communication or signal communication between himself and Mbalula, where Mbalula, since July, alerts him that the board wants to get rid of him as the CEO of PRASA. But he doesn't do anything about it. And in August, he also warns him that the board chair of PRASA, Leonard Ramatlakane, is, hatching this plan because he views Matthews as a stumbling block to his self-enrichment scheme, which is quite, worrying that then the minister, sits back and eventually Matthews gets fired in December by the same board.
Yeah.
So you would have thought that as the shareholder representative and as a person who's got authority over the board, then the minister would have acted against the board if he knew that the board was planning to do so, particularly for an agency that hasn't had a permanent CEO since 2015, and its finances are in tatters. Its operations are actually simply, non-existent, if one can even venture into that. Its own rail network, it's failing. It cannot run modern rail. So you would have thought that the minister would have actually acted in the interest of the citizens of the country if he actually knew that this was a plan that it was being hatched. I mean, for the first time in South Africa, we've heard a person being fired for holding dual citizenship. You can only imagine how many people in the ANC and in the government holds dual citizenship. So it's a very worrying story, and with a lot of allegations that actually need to be tested, and the minister to actually respond to those.
Absolutely. It's scandalous. In fact, there are lots of question marks that Minister Mbalula has got to answer to here. Before we look ahead, Nwabisa, let's talk about a story that piqued your interest. Anyone in particular in the Sunday papers?
Actually, it was Jika's story on PRASA, come to think of it. And I was just going to say very quickly about it, to say for me, I don't know if Jika did actually ask the minister why, quite a pointed question to say why had he not done anything. But it just really does seem that he was quite pliable to essentially what was happening, and instead of trying to step in to exercise his power to fix what was going on and to prevent what he thought was about to go down, that he kind of got into the factions of the agency, and that for me was quite problematic. That's how it came across anyway. So I'm not sure if he actually, if Jika asked him that pointed question as to why he never did, because it's just really unclear. It's why he actually never stepped in.
Thanduxolo?
Well, yeah, I did ask the minister that, and of course, his response was that, no, he can't talk on this issue because, it's in front of the judge at arbitration. So we still, we wait and see if he will respond to those allegations, because in that affidavit, Matthews challenges him to either deny or confirm the conversations between the two of them.
All right, let's try and look ahead into the week, guys. Nwabisa, coming to you, we know there's the budget speech. I'm not sure there's much to say at this point up until we see what is entailed in the minister's budget. But perhaps stories that are simmering, if I could use that term. There is Operation Dudula that seems to be, I think, ramping up every weekend. That surely is worrying. Then you have the situation at the Randfontein School, Jan Viljoen High School. That's where MEC Lesufi is addressing currently. In your thoughts, what are we to make of these stories? I think particularly the Operation Dudula, for me, it is extremely worrying, and there doesn't seem to be a counter by our country's authorities to say, yes, you are allowed to raise your voices as citizens of the country, but there's a limit to when you start approaching businesses and asking for certain documentation of individuals.
Absolutely, Claudia. And it's quite a strange thing. So on Friday, when the police minister was presenting crime stats, there was a question that was asked by one of the journalists regarding Operation Dudula. And what was interesting for me, so he kind of, took the question to the provincial commissioner of Gauteng, who was very non-committal, came across quite non-committal way when he answered the question. He said, well, we don't encourage people to while we understand and appreciate, the support of citizens in helping us fight crime, but we don't necessarily, encourage this kind of sort of vigilantism, my word, vigilantism. But essentially, for me, it was then, so what then are you going to do about it? Because there's criminality obviously taking place, and people are being targeted in this way, which is absolutely unacceptable. So what are you going to do about it? And for me, that is the missing thing. I'm not quite sure if there is any kind of appetite from our police, at least at this stage, to be able to do that.
I think I agree with you, because I think the only word that I heard was that we are monitoring closely the goings on. Thanduxolo, from your side, these two stories, anything that stands out for you as lacking or potentially dangerous?
Well, I can't add much more than what Nwabisa has said, particularly, with this Operation Dudula. It's a very worrying factor, and it seems to be just, continuing, and there's nothing that is being done either by government or the police themselves. But, you mentioned the issue of budget this week, which, I find it quite important. Considering the state of our finances, our fiscus in this country, the high unemployment rate, and also the state of our state-owned entities themselves, Eskom. There's still, continued blackouts, or load shedding, they call it now, load shedding. So there should be some kind of indication what would be allocated to Eskom and what's going to happen regarding Eskom. We know it's one of the highest in terms of deficit into the fiscus.
Yep.
So my interest is really into Eskom and what is the government thinking in terms of monies for Eskom. And of course, other state-owned entities such as Denel, because Denel is in fact now affecting the operations of our defense force.
Yeah.
So that's also another big issue. Is government going to bail out Denel? What is the plan when it comes to the budget for Denel? SANDF is quite important for us.
Absolutely correct. Absolutely spot on. You mentioned Eskom there. It is said time and again to be the biggest risk to whether or not the country is going to weather the storm of this failing economy. Thank you both very much for your time, Thanduxolo Jika and Nwabisa Makunga.